We know that Richard's remains are likely to lie in the remains of the Greyfriars.
By looking at the DNA of living individuals and comparing that.
And we find skeletal remains of somebody that look like it could be him.
In 2014, DNA testing confirmed that the skeleton beneath a quiet Leicester parking lot belonged to King Richard III. But a second test, one focused on the Y chromosome, hinted at a royal scandal big enough to shake a dynasty, yet officials brushed it aside as an unsolved anomaly.
Archaeologists in Britain say they've made an astonishing find. They believe they've uncovered the remains of long-lost royalty. He happens to be King Richard III.
Now, new findings from 2025 have cracked that mystery open, and what they reveal is far darker than a simple case of infidelity. So, what deception that's woven into the very foundations of centuries of royal power did this new findings reveal? Join us as we reveal what historians revised about King Richard III's DNA findings, and how 2025 uncovers the disturbing truth they missed. The controversial DNA analysis of King Richard III, the line curls around the block like a giant shivering serpent. Hundreds of people stand bundled against the early autumn chill, clutching coffees, stamping their feet, and doing that polite British thing where everyone pretends they're not freezing. A sensible-looking woman in a cardigan moves slowly down the queue, handing out flyers and apologising for the delay in the kind of apologetic tone only a Brit could master. "He's been waiting for hundreds of years," one woman jokes, nodding toward the archway ahead. "It won't kill us to wait another half hour." He, of course, is Richard III, England's most infamous villain king. School children know him as the hunchbacked tyrant who supposedly killed his own nephews. Shakespeare turned him into a theatrical monster, and until recently, his final resting place was quite literally unknown. The last glimpse anyone had of Richard III was his battered body being hauled naked through the streets of Leicester after his defeat at Bosworth in 1485. Afterwards, history swallowed him whole. That is, until he unexpectedly resurfaced beneath a municipal car park in 2012. And because this is Richard III we're talking about, even his DNA came with more plot twists than a Netflix historical drama. When the University of Leicester scientists got their hands on the bones, they approached them with the delicacy of dealing with a crime scene rather than a king. Archaeologists donned forensic suits, laboratories were sterilized like a sci-fi cleanroom, and every tool was treated as if one stray eyelash could ruin everything. Ancient DNA is fragile, broken, scattered, and degraded after centuries underground. But they had one advantage: mitochondrial DNA, the kind passed from mother to child and preserved in higher quantities than the rest. Bless the maternal line, biology's equivalent of a backup hard drive. And that backup worked beautifully. When the researchers compared the mitochondrial DNA from the skeleton to that of two living descendants, Michael Ibsen and Wendy Doldig, they found a near-perfect match. Both traced their lineage to Richard's sister, Anne of York, giving scientists exactly what they needed: proof beyond reasonable doubt that the king under the car park was the real deal. This result alone was historic. Newspapers exploded with headlines, scholars celebrated, Leicester danced. A medieval king had been found, identified, and restored to history with a level of scientific certainty once reserved for modern forensics. For about 5 minutes, everything was perfect. Then came the second test. Unlike mitochondrial DNA, which plays nicely, the Y chromosome is more of a troublemaker. It's passed strictly from father to son, generation after generation, making it a perfect tool for testing royal patrilineal descent. And that's exactly why things got awkward. The scientists compared Richard III's Y chromosome to that of living male line descendants of the House of Somerset, the same line that traced back to Edward III, Richard's great-great-grandfather. If history were correct, these should match. They didn't, not even close. Today, a paternal DNA mismatch is the kind of scandal you'd expect on daytime talk shows. But in medieval Europe, it was a potential apocalypse. The entire Plantagenet claim to the throne, Yorkist, Lancastrian, and everything in between, rested on unbroken male succession traced through the father's line. Kings didn't just inherit crowns, they inherited divine legitimacy. God was believed to have placed their blood on the throne. So if that bloodline wasn't pure, it threatens the legitimacy of Edward III's descendants, the Yorkist and Lancastrian claims, the justification for entire wars, including the Wars of the Roses, and yes, even the Tudor claim since Henry VII descended from the same tangled roots. One broken link could, on paper, render centuries of monarchy a cosmic mistake. Despite the explosive implications, historians and scientists handled the mismatch with the delicacy of someone tiptoeing through a room full of priceless vases. They worried that the public would misinterpret the data, that sensational headlines would rewrite history too aggressively, and that questioning royal legitimacy, even centuries later, might ignite political controversy. So the official line was cautious and conservative, which is why the world moved on, satisfied with the maternal match and the dramatic rediscovery of the king in the car park. So what did science later reveal about Richard III that blew the lid on this revelation? Let's find out. The Plantagenet lie. When the Y chromosome results were first announced, historians didn't just raise eyebrows, they nearly fell out of their chairs. This wasn't a minor lab hiccup, it was a full-blown genetic contradiction, the kind of thing that simply cannot happen under normal inheritance. Somewhere in the 19 generations separating Richard I III from his modern-day male line relatives, the father on the family tree was not the father in real life. Science has a polite name for this, a false paternity event. But let's drop the courtesy. Someone, somewhere in the royal family, had a secret. And that secret had the power to blow a hole straight through the heart of English royal history. Because the Plantagenet kings, the ones who fought, married, schemed, and occasionally murdered their way across the medieval stage, built their entire claim to the throne on one sacred idea: an unbroken line of fathers and sons stretching back to Edward III. A line they believed was ordained by God, confirmed by blood, and defended by war. But the DNA said otherwise. It said the bloodline wasn't unbroken, and it wasn't what the history books had confidently declared for centuries. The most shocking part? This wasn't abstract genetics. This meant that at some point, a high-born woman had a child whose biological father was not her husband, and that child inherited titles, lands, and eventually a crown. One moment of private scandal altered the course of England's destiny. Naturally, everyone wanted to know the same thing. Where did the break happen? That's where the story slides from clear science into fiction. The research team published their findings in Nature Communications, a prestigious journal that does not usually dabble in royal drama, but when it came to the explosive implications, they handled the information like it was a live grenade. They presented two possibilities. The break happened after Richard III, somewhere in the long and winding line that eventually produced the modern-day Dukes of Beaufort. This explanation kept Richard and the entire House of York safe from scandal. The monarchy would stay intact. The textbooks would stay printed. No need to panic. Which brings us to the alternate possibilities. The break happened before Richard III. This was the one everyone wanted to tiptoe around, because if the false paternity event occurred earlier, then Richard III, his brothers, even King Edward IV, father of the princes in the Tower, might not have been biological descendants of their supposed forefathers. If that were true, then Richard had no legitimate blood claim to the throne he fought and died for. The entire House of York? Gone? The Tudor dynasty that followed? Built on the same shaky foundations. The 2014 team, therefore, did the only thing they reasonably could. They stayed vague. They concluded that the break could have happened anywhere in the 19 generations. Science simply wasn't advanced enough to identify which Y chromosome was the true Plantagenet one, or where the imposter slipped in. By softening the uncertainty, they softened the implications. And in doing so, they allowed the public to celebrate what felt like the safer narrative. We found a king, and not the uncomfortable alternative. For a decade, that was the quiet truth. A truth politely ignored because it was simply too messy, too destabilizing, too medieval soap opera to process. So the two possibilities lingered like a riddle. But what happened in 2025 that changed everything? Let's delve into that. The century-old rumor is confirmed. Everyone knew the Y chromosome mismatch meant something huge. They just didn't know what. The data was there, the tools weren't. So the mystery lingered, a kind of academic purgatory. Then, in 2025, science finally caught up with the gossip. An independent team from the University of Leicester, working with geneticists at Harvard and the Max Planck Institute, launched something with a title so dramatic it could have been a prestige TV miniseries, the Royal Bloodline Genomic Reanalysis Project. Their mission wasn't to recheck Richard III's bones. That would be too easy. They wanted to do the one thing everyone had tiptoed around for a decade: pinpoint exactly where the royal bloodline broke. No more speculation, no more scholarly throat-clearing. It was time to follow the DNA wherever it led. And the tools at their disposal? Absolute science fiction compared to 2014. They used long-read sequencing, which can read huge, intact stretches of DNA rather than the tiny, shredded fragments older methods rely on. They used proteomic analysis, studying ancient proteins like tiny, time-stamped fingerprints. They used epigenetic mapping, which reveals environmental markers, things like stress, illness, even diet from someone's lifetime. In short, they brought a genetic lightsaber to a knife fight. But there was a problem. They had two conflicting Y chromosomes, Richard III's and the modern Somerset family's. They were different, completely, unmistakably different. The original 2014 researchers couldn't determine which one represented the true Plantagenet male line. It was like having two keys and no lock to test them on. So the 2025 team needed a third reference point, someone unquestionably in the male line of Edward III, and someone who lived before any paternity break could have happened. They needed a DNA Rosetta Stone, and unbelievably, they got one. After months of negotiations, Westminster Abbey granted permission to take a microscopic sample from the tomb of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, son of King Edward III, uncle of Richard II, a patriarch of the Lancastrian branch, and, most importantly, dead long before any alleged mischief in the family tree. If Richard III was the question mark, John of Gaunt was the answer key. Meanwhile, the team ran a deep structural analysis on the Somerset line, tracing their Y chromosome back through centuries of documented father-to-son inheritance. They weren't just cross-checking family trees, they were excavating genetics. And then the results dropped. The Somerset Y line wasn't just consistent, it was rock solid. A 99% certainty of being unbroken all the way back to the 1400s. Translation? That comfortable little 2014 safe explanation, the one suggesting the Somersets must have had a discreet affair somewhere over the last 5 centuries, was officially on life support. Their lineage was clean, untouched, intact. The Somerset line was the real, original Plantagenet male bloodline, which left one uncomfortable conclusion. Richard III's Y chromosome was the odd one out. The break wasn't after him, it was before him. The 2025 project didn't suggest this. It proved it, mathematically, genetically, irrefutably. The false paternity event happened somewhere between Richard III, his father, and his grandfather. And just like that, the historical spotlight whipped back 5 centuries and froze on one man, Richard, Duke of York, the man whose claim to pure royal blood launched the Wars of the Roses. And suddenly, a rumor whispered during those same wars snapped into horrifying clarity. Enemies of the House of York had once claimed that Richard, Duke of York, wasn't actually the son of the Earl of Cambridge. They accused his mother, Cecily Neville, proud Cis, as she was known, of having an affair with a handsome archer named Blayborn, while her husband was away campaigning. At the time, everyone dismissed it as political mudslinging, just another medieval smear campaign. But the DNA says the rumour was probably true. Richard, Duke of York, the man who insisted his blood was purer than the king's, was almost certainly illegitimate. And that changes everything. Kings rise, dynasties fall, wars ignite and end based on the blood claim of this one man. A single secret reshapes the entire map of English history. But how did we even get here, to this moment where science rewrote royalty? Let's go back to the strange, miraculous discovery that started it all. A king beneath a parking lot. A king beneath a parking lot. It sounds like the setup to a bizarre pub joke. A king walks into a parking lot and never walks out. For more than 5 centuries. That was the quiet end of King Richard III's story. His final moments were anything but quiet. Cut down in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth Field, the last English king to die on a battlefield, the last ruler of the Plantagenet line, and in many ways, the final casualty of the brutal Wars of the Roses. Richard didn't get the respect usually reserved for the crown. Henry Tudor's forces, eager to prove the dynasty had truly changed hands, stripped his body, slung it over a horse, and paraded him through Leicester. Nothing says, "Your reign is over," quite like dragging a naked king through the town. After this theatrical humiliation, Richard was buried quickly and quietly in a modest grave at Greyfriars, a local church. Then history did its favourite trick. It moved on. The Reformation arrived, the church was demolished, the stones carted away, the land sold for assorted practical uses, and in time it was paved into an unremarkable parking lot. The precise spot where a king had once been laid to rest, lost into urban myth. Some claimed his bones had been tossed into the River Soar by a mob. Others figured the grave was destroyed. Shakespeare certainly didn't help his legacy, painting him as a twisted, scheming villain with a hunched back and a blackened soul. Richard III became more myth than man. Enter Philippa Langley, a screenwriter, not an archaeologist, a determined enthusiast who felt, deep in her gut, that history had done Richard wrong. She suspected the Tudor version of the king was a political smear campaign centuries before PR firms existed. So she did what every reasonable person does when they believe the world is wrong. She spent years studying dusty old maps, layering medieval Leicester over its modern streets like a historical jigsaw puzzle. And she found something. A peculiarity in a car park's layout. A hunch she simply couldn't ignore. Archaeologists were skeptical. Reporters snickered. But eventually, a trench 6 feet wide and 50 feet long was carved straight through the asphalt. Most people expected nothing more than broken bricks and disappointment. Instead, on day one, they hit bone. Human leg bones. Promising, but hardly enough, this was a former graveyard after all. Yet, as the excavation team brushed away centuries of soil, the picture sharpened. The skeleton lay in a grave cut too short, forcing the head into an awkward, propped-up angle. The grave was rushed, crude, and absolutely not fit for a king. Then came the wounds, blows consistent with battle, and the unmistakable curvature of the spine. Not the monstrous hunch Shakespeare invented, but scoliosis. Piece by piece, the story unfolding from that shallow grave matched the historical Richard, not the theatrical one. Scholars, skeptics, and spectators stared into the trench as history blinked awake. And Philippa Langley, who had spent years being dismissed as chasing a fantasy, sat trembling beside the excavation, watching the impossible take shape right in front of her. The miracle under the car park had happened. But who is Richard, beyond the propaganda, beyond the legend, beyond Shakespeare's shadow? Let's find out. Richard III's nightmarish reputation. If the Leicester dig cracked open a mystery, the bigger questions still lingered in the air like dust rising from the trench. Who exactly was the man they just unearthed? Because for centuries, Richard III wasn't treated like a king. He was treated like a villain in a morality play. And nobody felt that injustice more sharply than Philippa Langley. Langley didn't begin as a crusader. She was a screenwriter on holiday, reading Josephine Tey's The Daughter of Time, when she stumbled into the controversy of Richard III's reputation. The more she read, the more something felt off. If Richard was such a monster, why did the records from his own lifetime look normal? Even admirable? So she made a decision most of us only fantasize about. Instead of yelling at historians on the internet, she dug up a king. Her obsession was simple. She wanted the real Richard, not the boogeyman with a hunchback, born with teeth, 2 years in the womb, and other colourful Tudor insults. And when the skeleton at the car park revealed scoliosis rather than a twisted, monstrous deformity, that alone was a major strike against the propaganda. He was strong, he was capable, she insisted in interviews. Not a saint, but a man, and that's all I want, to find the real man, because with the truth, he'll finally be able to rest. She even started shaping a film about him, eyeing actor Richard Armitage. Yes, Thorin Oakenshield himself, who happens to be from Richard's home county, born near Bosworth, and named after the king. And while Langley isn't the first to try rehabilitating Richard, Tey's novel sparked a small Richard. The third fan club in the 1950s, the discovery of his body gave the movement something earlier generations never had: evidence. Richard has always had 2 lives: the historical man and the Hollywood Shakespeare hybrid with a crooked back and a taste for villainy. Shakespeare's play practically cemented Richard as the poster child for evil monarchs, half politician, half goblin. Attempts to counter this caricature existed, but they were niche. Now, with archaeology and DNA giving Richard a literal new face, popular culture was poised for a rewrite. Between Langley's film ambitions, Armitage's uncanny suitability, and the sheer drama of the discovery, Richard was suddenly trending again, 500 years late. To understand Richard, you have to understand his childhood, which was basically the medieval version of growing up in a tornado. Born in 1452, he entered a world already cracking under dynastic rivalry. When he was 8, his father and older brother's lives were taken at Wakefield, forcing young Richard and his brother George into exile. Not exactly the upbringing of a scheming mastermind, more like a boy swept along by political chaos. When Edward IV reclaimed the throne, Richard returned and quickly proved himself loyal, tough, and disciplined. He trained under the great Earl of Warwick, honing the skills of a soldier and statesman. This wasn't the Richard of legend, the skulking backstabber. This was a teenager learning command, battlecraft, diplomacy. He fought real battles, was wounded at Barnet, and helped secure his brother's reign. And yes, somewhere along the way, he fell in love with Anne Neville, Warwick's daughter. Shakespeare conveniently left out the romance subplot. Richard's climb to the throne wasn't a straight line, it was a political earthquake. Edward IV died suddenly in 1483, leaving the crown to 12-year-old Edward V. Richard stepped in as protector, housing the young king and his brother in the Tower of London, which sounds sinister now but was standard royal practice then. Then Parliament declared that Edward IV's marriage was invalid, making his sons illegitimate. Suddenly, Richard, not the princes, was the rightful heir. He took the crown, and then the princes vanished. That single event locked Richard into villain status for centuries, regardless of who was actually responsible. Shakespeare wrote the tragedy, the Tudors wrote the history, and the public wrote Richard off. Here's the twist. The man who became a symbol of treachery may not have been the traitor at all. His reign, just over 2 years, was plagued by rebellion, rumour, and Tudor propaganda. His death at Bosworth made him a convenient scapegoat, and history ran with it. And now, with the 2025 genetic findings, the story of Richard III doesn't just challenge what we know about one king, it threatens to rewrite 500 years of royal history. Because sometimes science doesn't just uncover bones, it uncovers the lies beneath them. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check out another interesting video by clicking on the video shown on your screen. See you on the other side.